What is going on, folks? It is Steiner here with a very, very special episode of Secondhand Talent. First, thank you to Luke Chu for our featured toy this season, Lo-Fi, and thank you to Tenacious Toys for the lovely desk candy. If you'll notice, we have a bit of an analog setup on the table today in honor of our guest, Mr. Dave Eckenberg. Dave, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Well, we're really happy to have you. Folks, just to give you a brief overview of where Dave comes from and what he's been doing. He worked in the golden age of television from 1972 to 1998 in KCOP TV in LA, and then at Metro Tape West, the Vidtronics company, and Unitel. And us 90s and 80s kids know, and earlier than that, we all know that those are the biggest production houses for television in the United States of America during those years. And we're going to get right into it because I am just so elated that we finally get to break into the world of television here on Secondhand Talent. You'll notice I've got my notes with me because we've got a lot to go over. But before we get into it, Dave, our first question, when we first established contact with each other, got to know each other a little bit, I'm curious to know the first time you heard the name Secondhand Talent, what did you think the show might be about?
Well, first thought was unsung heroes, but then I thought again, well, heroes is really for military and first responders who risk their life in the course of their work. So I thought better might be unsung stars, because we're the people that make the stars better and help them in their endeavors. And so a star seemed like a way to go.
Yeah, I love that take. I mean, for every great film, there's got to be a great supporting cast. There's got to be great production. There's got to be great sound. There's got to be great cinematography. There are so many elements, and with any live music event as well, there's got to be great light production. There's got to be great audio. There's got to be great stage management. There are so many factors that go into creating the pieces of media and the experiences that people love so much. And that's what this platform is all about, is highlighting the stories of those people who facilitated those magic moments in so many people's lives.
So true.
So getting started with it, now folks, Dave here is a pioneer in video editing. And I'd love to just start out with, normally we fluff a little bit at the beginning, but there's so much to get to here. So first, I'd love to hear a little bit about, kind of what was going on in the late 60s, early 70s in the media landscape. What did television look like at the time? And what inspired you to start dabbling in the media?
Well, there was certainly no internet, not a lot of computerization. And so TV shows were quite the thing. And people would go home just to be able to watch All in the Family or any other of the big shows. They didn't have DVRs to record. So it was really an event that you look forward to, and you kind of had to be there. And it just had a bigger impact on society, I think, than now that things are so diverse and spread out. It's not quite the same impact. But I loved technical stuff, and it just drew me to that environment of being able to be curious and learn about things and work in that field. So I started out at Pasadena Community College in their radio and TV. I got an AA degree in telecommunications. They had a radio studio. It was just like a real thing with boards, at that time, record players and so on. And they had a limited amount of TV stuff, but the TV technology back then was very expensive. So they had secondhand gear from like NBC and stuff too. We could kind of play with. But that turned out to be a good thing for me because the instructor there had contacts in Hollywood. And so he hooked me up with KCOP, and I found out what they needed. And they actually required a FCC first-class radio telephone license to work there. And that's an extremely difficult test to pass. And it's really
Just real briefly for our
Hmm.
listeners and viewers who may have no experience with radio, would you mind just explaining just a little bit? I am aware of what that licensure is, but
Hmm.
if you could just explain just a little bit what that means to our casual listener, I'd appreciate that.
Well, it's a legal license that really allows anyone to monitor and do record logs of transmitters, essentially. But they also require you to have electronics knowledge, math knowledge, and rules and regulations as well. And I was fortunate to find a school in Huntington Beach that was the William B. Ogden Radio Operational Engineering School. And it was an accelerated course. And from 6 to 8 weeks was the course period. And you lived at the school. You did rules and regs during the day. And then at nighttime, you had another teacher for doing math, tons of math. And so going through that was, well, people that come out of college can't pass that test. FCC was very devious in the way they structured the questions, all multiple choice. But our instructor was a better genius, and he taught us how to take that test. In fact, to take any test, really. And so that was a blessing for that. So with that in hand, I could go to Channel 13, and I interviewed with the chief engineer there. And I had virtually no practical experience in the professional world, but they hired me anyways. And so it was actually like a boot camp for broadcasting. I got to try everything. I got to take my hand at audio, uh, camera operating, and then videotape. And I found that I wasn't that interested in pure audio. And the camera operations, everyone wanted to be a camera operator, so the station didn't have to make them permanent staff or give them any raises or anything. And I thought, oh, that's something I want to follow. Plus, it was doing real camera work is extremely concentrative work. You focus has to be unbelievable, and it's a lot of.
I was just going to say, sorry to interject, but I recall
Hmm.
during my interview with Susanna Millman, who was one of the photographers of the Grateful Dead,
Hmm.
and still very active. We had a wonderful conversation, and part of it was specifically focused on the advancement of technology and
Hmm.
the gear bag changeover from the 80 late 70s early 80s, and the amount of lenses and film
Right.
rolls and cameras that you had to take with you, as opposed to now where you can kind of fix everything in one lens and take
Right.
minimal other equipment. And you're talking about exactly that, where I'm fortunate enough to have similar or relatively similar experience in an analog radio station from my college
Hmm.
days. But
Yeah.
from the from the camera production perspective, I mean, these are heavy duty machines. These are not the cameras we know today, not even
No.
handheld. We're talking about shoulder mount. We're talking
Hmm.
about multiple levels of precision. And then on top of that, you mentioned the degrees of math and all of the other things that they required. It seems like an immense workload.
It really is. And so I thought, well, maybe I'll take a look at videotape operating. And because it's a complex subject, takes a lot of skill, they would tend to put people on permanent staff. So you got benefits and the pay escalator. And so I did that. And actually was fortunate to learn tape operation from the maintenance staff. And so I got to learn how to calibrate, set up. And these machines were 2-inch videotape, and they're like two refrigerators stuck side by side. They're really big equipment. And I got so good at it that they actually asked me to help the maintenance people by coming in at 4 o'clock in the morning and cleaning, calibrating, and setting up all the machines for the day's work, which was great. So I did that for a few years, as well as recording some other local shows. I worked on local talk shows, and I also recorded the Hobo Kill a Children's show. That was my first big recording. And so stayed with that for about 4 years, and they started to get into more sophisticated electronic gear, and it really wasn't my background. So I decided, well, I don't want to go that way because it'll just not end well. So it turned out that a coworker was going to go over to KTTV Channel 11, which had a big production and post-production site called Metrotape West. And so I went over there, interviewed, and instantly got hired.
I mean, you know, and which is why, and we're talking roughly, if I have my timeline correct, this is roughly 1976, 77
Exactly. Perfect.
when you made
Hmm.
this jump. And for folks who aren't really aware, or who didn't grow up at least in the VHS era, you know, video tape splicing and editing and modification and overlay, this is something that was, you know, heavily manually intensive. And like you were saying, you know, it would behoove the studio, in my opinion, to bring on long-term staff as opposed to
Hmm.
video camera operators due to, I'm sure, you know, and correct me if I'm wrong, there would be an inverse proportion for the amount of people who want to be video operators as
Hmm.
opposed to working in
Right.
videotape because of the intensity of the work. But therein also lies a niche and an opportunity.
Hmm. Exactly.
Well,
Yeah.
that's
So the
really. I was just gonna say it's a fantastic, it's a fantastic way to get to make a decision. You know,
oh
to
yeah.
the path of least resistance
Mhm.
and the most beneficial.
Right. Yeah. The first jobs I started doing with them was assistant editor, working on their online edit bay, where they had 3 videotape machines, 2 playbacks, and 1 record, and they had a computer editing system that controlled everything. And the first show I worked on was called All That Glitters. It lasted about a season. It was a reverse thematic show, thinking of like Mad Men, where it's a very masculine oriented workplace, and the female
From the phrase "all
work.
that glitters is blinding," or
Yeah, all that glitters isn't gold. But in
ah,
this
yeah,
that but in the show, it was a role reversal, and the women were in the positions of power and bosses, and they bossed the men who are secretaries around. Just an exact role reversal. So it's
in
really ahead of its.
1977.
It was really ahead of its time.
Wow.
It was a Norman Lear production, and he was always willing to tackle subjects that were often not well done.
And speaking of Norman Lear, that's exactly where I wanted to go to next, because I know that in your career, as you move forward with Channel 11 and Metro Tape West, that you began to work on quite a number of Norman Lear productions. Who, for the folks who don't know, is one of the greatest television creators in history, in my
Yeah, he
opinion.
was
Anyway,
he was amazing. Yeah, and at that time, Metrotape had all of his major shows. I worked on All in the Family, Good Times, The Jeffersons, Maude, One Day at a Time, Different Strokes, Fernwood Tonight, and so those are just the biggest ones that we would remember.
what are some of your favorite experiences? I mean, talk about, you know, the list. I'm sure that list of shows right there is the list of shows that raised so many of the people who were listening to or watching this interview. What are some of your favorite experiences in your first few years with Metro Tape West, working on some of those shows?
Well, it was like a space shot where you just couldn't imagine walking in the door what you're going to find that day. There's always something new, um, and there's always various degrees of stress. And we had certain clients who you think of royalty and how they behaved and interact with people. They were just like they couldn't do anything wrong. They're just
Mm.
so up there. But there were a lot of nice people too. And one of my favorite stories is I was actually working on an HBO documentary with Dick Cavett, and it was a documentary about decades. They had from the 20s through the 70s, so they take a 10-year period and they do a documentary of all archival footage. And it was done what we would call green screen now. Of course, then they use blue as the background to insert backgrounds behind the actor. And it was such a touchy operation that they actually put a videotape playback machine in the control room with the directors and the production staff. And they had me do it. And so I was thinking, well, why did they have me do this? Well, I thought, I'm probably the most experienced tape operator they had because of my KCOP experience. And it was with a brand new 1-inch videotape machine that could play back, and you could coast it to a stop and it would still have a still frame. The old 2-inch machines, once you stop them, they did not make a picture. So you couldn't use them in that environment. So I got to use that machine. It's the first time on any job I've used it. And so it was an adventure. But I had to figure out a way to make the machine stop plus or minus a video frame to put the background where Dick Cavett would be. So they had a assembly line from Henry Ford doing the Model A's or something. And as the vehicle came by to the middle of the frame, it had to stop. Then Dick would lean through, pretending to honk the horn, put his arm back, and then the car would go through. And so I had to figure out how to make it stop just perfectly. And
task.
yeah. And so I had to invent a way to do that on the fly. And the best.
Well, I was going to say necessity is the mother of invention. I mean, wow.
Totally. Yeah. The best one was in the 70s. They had a picture shooting across Sunset Boulevard with traffic going by. And I was supposed to stop the traffic. Dick would walk by and then the car would go behind him. Okay. So while we're rehearsing, I thought I'd play a trick on Dick, and I didn't stop the car, and it bumped into him. He was so fast at humor, he fell down on the ground of the set and rolled like it hit him. So you could say that Dick Cavett and I played a very expensive video game.
That one of the first video games, to be fair. I mean, wow, a true video game. That's
yeah, exactly.
One contestant. Yeah. Oh man, wonderful. I mean, and to be, and it just, I'm sitting here listening to this story, and I'm, like, the other character in this story is Dick Cavett. Like, wow, like that's incredible. I mean, I gotta also ask at this point, did you have that same kind of perspective of the the gravity of what you were doing and working with at the time, or was this something that you were just kind of going with the motions?
No, it was strictly focus, and it's something I learned that, especially with videotape recording, is we never got involved with the content. I had to look at this, essentially the surface of the screen to watch for defects, errors, or dropouts, things like that. And so it was not something I would say I went out to enjoy, but in hindsight, it was darn funny.
I mean, I absolutely, and it's just something. Again, I'm rarely speechless on the show. I'm kind of stammering and at a loss for words here, and I'm clearly just trying to think of things to say to fill space because I got okay, I got it. I one of my favorite things about this program, and I've been just so blessed and lucky to be able to talk to folks like yourself, like Ron Bruner Sr., like Justin Hampton, Susanna Millman, folks who have been around the scene, for longer than I've been alive. Some of whom I've been fans of. I've had one of Susanna's books for years before I interviewed her. I've been a fan of hers forever. I've been a fan of Justin's since I was a kid playing with magic cards he designed.
Hmm.
And it's never lost on me just the how lucky I am to be able to hear
Hmm.
these stories directly from the source.
Well, it's such a unique experience. It really shows, for me especially, the value of being adaptable and being able to reinvent yourself based on changing technology and financial things and so on. Um, because wow, if I'd have just stayed with videotape operating, well, those are practically obsolete. They don't even do online editing anymore. It's all Avid stuff on a computer. So there's no type operator, no assistant needed in that case. So I always thought I should try to move towards something that was more creative that couldn't be automated as easily. And so that's where my next steps really led me.
And that would be the Vidtronics.
Yes. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Well, it was one of those great instances where things just work out. At Metrotape, they lost the contract for Lear's shows, and they all moved to Vidtronics, which was owned by Technicolor. And Vidtronics was like working for the Yankees. They were probably the top production house in the country. They had
And
all the best editors.
just so we're clear on our timeline,
Hmm.
what year are we talking about here, roughly? As the move
Oh,
over to
in
Vidtronics?
81,
80, 81.
1980,
That's
81. Yeah.
fantastic.
And they had the best tape operators. They had the best maintenance people. If they were working on a project and they needed a technology to achieve it, they would actually invent it. Those people, they had engineers that would invent. Yeah.
That's
It was the
amazing.
first.
I mean, that's wonderful. It's just I've got friends in the industry who have invented new ways to take
Mhm.
camera shots, and I have a friend of mine. Shout out to Mr. Brandon Spacely, who operates his light rig with a Guitar Hero guitar, and my buddy Mike Silverman from Great Eye Films, who operates one of his cameras with a PlayStation 4 controller. You know, it's amazing to hear that you had a company behind you, not
Oh
just
yeah.
that supported innovation, but went ahead and said, we'll fund this innovation to
Hmm.
create what we need to
Yep.
bring it to life.
Exactly. Oh yeah. And so I did start doing assistant editing on some of the shows I'd worked on, as well as some new shows like Soap, for instance, was a big takeoff in soap operas, but a comedy version. And one day I was asked by my supervisor if he could ride in with me to work. We lived near the same area. And as we're going in, he said, well, have you ever thought about learning Chyron title graphics? And I said, oh, no, I really hadn't. Then I thought about it. Here's some.
Oh, I was going to say, if you wouldn't mind, I did my research for the show, but to explain to our audience
Mhm.
just a little bit what Chiron means, because it's not, in the lexicon
Yeah,
really anymore.
not in the, no, it isn't. But it's an electronic device that can create letters and type for credits, either for announcements or for starring by, directed by, and so on. They're often on the lower third of the screen as well. And so I decided, well, that sounds creative. There are also some technical aspects of it which appeal to me. So I did that. And so they immediately sent me to Chyron headquarters in Long Island, New York for training for like a week. And it was really nice that they did that because I learned the automation functions of it. So I used that knowledge to create a system we would do a lot of credit rolls where the images go vertical through the frame, and it might have to be 30 or 40 seconds long. And depending on how many credits you had to jam them in like a bunch of sardines to make it fit. And it wasn't always easy to get the timing right. And so you'd have to guess. And so you'd have to go frame by frame, adjusting the spacing between all these elements. And so what would take maybe 45 minutes to do by hand, utilizing this software that was in the machine that nobody had done before. I could do the same thing in like 5 minutes. So it made it very productive. And
Now,
so that was,
just to be clear, you're telling me that you discovered and then utilize and repurpose
right.
pre-existing technology
Yes. Yeah.
to
Yeah.
reduce a 45-minute process down to a 5-minute process. And how long were you in school before you developed this technique?
Well, it was just in the Chyron school for about a week, but they didn't teach that. I had to learn that on my own, of course.
Oh, that, come on, man. Why, that's
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah. Yeah.
How
Yeah.
and how long after you invented this process did it get picked up by your house?
Oh, right away.
That's incredible.
It's it's it just really helps to have an innate sense of curiosity to learn things. And
Absolutely.
what I found was if I really learned the depth and the basics of the system, then I could find out ways to even make it better often, which is of course very cool. And
Absolutely.
at the same time, this was way before Adobe PostScript fonts, where now I could go online and choose from hundreds of type styles, download them, and use them instantly. Well, we didn't have that. They had like 6 fonts for the thing, and it was very limited. So I thought, well, we should try to improve that. And so there was a way to use a camera and record physical outlines of letters, digitize them, format it, and set it up. And so we would take Letraset press-on sheets, which were big sheets of alphabets, all the letters and numbers and punctuation. And so I taught myself how to do that. And then the tricky part is making it look good in the NTSC television system, which is of limited resolution back then. It's not nearly as high quality as now, of course. And so it gave us probably the best font library in the industry because I worked on so many different elements. And that's reflected in a lot of the shows I worked on. I created graphics titling for.
And I really resemble that remark because we kind of when my wife Steiner developed our artwork, she kind of inadvertently developed a font to
Mm-hmm.
go along with it, and
Mm-hmm.
and you know, folks, if you're on Microsoft Word or Google Docs and you hit font and, or if it says Times New Roman or Arial and you go down and see all of those fonts in there, that's what our friend Dave here is talking about. And initially, like you mentioned, there were only so many. And to be able, again, to take the initiative to not just develop for or more, but to have them. Would you mind letting us know? Believe you said it was on 4 shows that it was implemented. Would you mind letting us know which 4?
Oh,
I may have it here actually.
yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. The Bob Newhart Show,
oh,
Facts of
well,
Life,
okay, all right. There,
Family Ties. So, yeah.
come on, man. I think, and just not to sell yourself short here. I just want to put out here the Bob Newhart Show, Different Strokes, Family Ties, Day at a Time. Oh, and the Epcot Center. Let's not leave that out.
Well,
That's. Can
that
you
was
tell us
for
about that?
yeah, that's a special case. That's for Disney, and this was when the Epcot Center was just opening up, and they wanted to have a announcement system with the lettering and information projected onto a screen. And in typical Disney fashion, they didn't want to use the limited resolution of NTSC TV, which was a 4:3 aspect ratio, very square. They wanted it to be widescreen. And so they developed a font that was squashed, and then they would, on the projection system, spread it out to be wide angle. It would look a lot like our high definition today. But as it turned out, their in-house Chyron person wasn't available, so they came to Vitronics, and I ended up encoding 2 fonts for a World Showcase and a Communicore that were used for quite some time in Disneyland.
Can I ask what was it like seeing your work projected at Disneyland?
No, pretty awesome.
I imagine so, and it's incredible to. I mean,
Hmm.
with all due respect, the humility. I mean, is impressive. I mean, you're talking about, and it may go over the heads of some of our younger
Hmm.
viewers and listeners, but I grew up, you know, in our prior discussion, we talked about
Hmm.
how you worked in the golden age of television. And,
Hmm.
I'm a 90s kid, and I grew up in the golden age of sitcoms. And, you know, my house was a Saturday Night Live household. We
Hmm.
gathered every Saturday night to watch that show. We watched Jeopardy every day. Seinfeld was a big part of growing up, and television has been such a massive part of my life. And I know this show generally focuses on the secondhand talent, the rest of the villagers in the village it takes to make live music. But the fact of the matter is, it's really every facet of entertainment requires so many individual, not just pieces. Like, I mean, let's look at it like a game of chess. We have our pawns, but also our rooks and knights and king and queen and bishops. There's so many different roles. There are so many different people required for each role. And to have the opportunity to talk to someone who was not just working in that time when I was enjoying,
Hmm.
but to be talking to a pioneer in the field is really just, I mean, absolutely, it's what this show is all about. And I'm really grateful that we get to extend it out into television.
No, I'm really happy to be here with you. It's been quite an honor.
So, after all of these adventures, what was the next step in your career?
My next step was to uh, find another appropriate job, and I had a relationship with a management couple. It was a husband and wife, and their name was Newt and Rita, and I got on really well with them, and I wanted to work for them at some time in the future. Well, it turned out that they um, were hired to be the head people at Unitel Video, and and so I went and talked to them, and of course she said, "Well, in a couple of weeks I'm going to have an opening," and blah blah blah. So, anyways, I got hired on there, and their first facility was actually on the Paramount movie lot, so I got to go onto the Paramount lot every day and work on things. And we were right next door to Entertainment Tonight, the variety talk show, and we actually supplied the paint box facilities for them initially to do their graphics. And so this is the paint box was something that was made by a company called Quantel in England, and it wasn't. We didn't have these at Fedtronics. That's one thing about Fedtronics is they didn't quite keep up, and I guess Technicolor decided, well, that's it, we're going to stop it. So this was a great thing for me to have this new avenue of technology to learn and be exposed to.
So is it fair to say that at Vidtronics, they, at the time that you came in, it was all
Hmm.
cutting edge, but they just
Yeah.
didn't
Hmm.
they didn't maintain with
Hmm.
the times. And at the
No.
time that we're talking
Hmm.
about, specifically early 80s, this is really when we're seeing not just the golden age of sitcoms
Hmm.
and television in general, with talk shows, booming and really
Hmm.
exploding. But we're also seeing a rapid advancement. And, you talked about yourself, revamping the Chyron editing process for end
Hmm.
credits. We're talking about a period of time unlike many others where technology was at the cutting edge and forefront, and yet constantly being developed and improved.
It's in flight. A lot of change.
Yeah, a lot of
Yeah.
change. And
Yeah.
how did it feel? I got, before we continue on into the career discussion, just from a personal perspective, did you was there ever a sense in this shift over to Unitel that technology was moving faster than you were able to keep up with it? Or did you always feel like you were able to rise to whatever challenge you were given, presented?
No, somehow I've been fearless that way. I can't explain why, but just had that kind of confidence. And I really didn't make a distinction between a small job and a big job. They're all the same to me. I'm going to do the best I can with the tools I have and what I'm expected to do. And so it really helps to smooth things out so you don't get too, flustered.
And you talk about Unitel, and I mentioned before that, I grew up in the golden age of sitcoms, and now
Hmm.
that is a logo and a name that I recall seeing at the end of a lot of television
Hmm.
shows that I
Yes.
watched growing up.
Yep. Yep.
What was it like? We talked a little bit about seeing your work at the Epcot Center and in other places, but now we're talking about nationally syndicated and broadcast like you may come home and turn on the television and your work is on the screen.
Oh, I got the story for you for that. It's
All right, let's go.
like I apprenticed myself to learn Quantel Paintbox, which is the forerunner of Photoshop. So I learned how to do airbrushing and that kind of stuff. And we had a job where a mini series called the War and Remembrance, and it was a 5-day episodic. Each day had a different main title, and they did it such fast turnaround, was on film, that the main titles had dirt in spots in the whole thing, and it needed to be fixed. And we didn't have anyone available, so I said, well, I'll use a brand new digital disc recorder and the paint box, put them together and make a rotoscoping machine. And I, frame by frame, painted out the dirt for that day's episode. I'd come in at like 6, be done by 10. They'd put it on the satellite to New York. I would go home after my shift, have dinner, put my feet up, and I could watch what I just worked on that morning on the air.
Wow.
Yeah. So talk about exciting.
Well, I mean, and especially rewarding after such a painstaking process. Now, we're just for
Hmm.
reference, we're talking about coming in at 6 a.m. and leaving at 10
Right.
p.m. Like, we're not, this is not a 4 hour shift we're
Hmm.
talking about
No,
here. This is an all day.
no.
And then you're coming home in time for broadcast, which is, I mean, wow, what, what a, what a feeling. I mean, that's got to be, uh, you know, can I ask you this?
Hmm.
Were did your friends and family like were they lit up about this, or was this just something that you were kind of, oh, this is just what I do for work, or were they kind of hyping you up a little bit?
Oh, my family knew, and they were pretty excited. But in general, a lot of people, they just don't see it, which is unfortunate. But I was able to work on graphics for stock shots, essentially for Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, um, the Wayans brothers, Grace Under Fire, and I did actually encode digitize the fonts for Star Trek: The Next Generation, which we got in. So I did that. I figured out what the font was, and did all the usual stuff on it.
I mean, now
So
let's talk about the ultimate syndication right there. Now let's not sell
yeah.
ourselves short a little bit. And in addition, you've also worked with illustrious names like Bob Hope, Jane Goodall. I mean,
Hmm.
these are
Yep.
people, Bette Midler,
Hmm.
Blondie. These are names and bands and artists that have withstood the generations.
Hmm. Yes.
Along with the
Hmm.
programming.
Yeah.
Um, Still some receiving honors to this day. And
Hmm.
you touched on something that I think is really important there. You know, it 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 is it in music and comedy, which is what I can really
Hmm.
speak to. it is not always a gratifying experience. And yes, your family is always supportive, hopefully,
Hmm.
of your creative endeavors. And now, in your case, you're getting paid for it as well. But just in general, and it's another thing to be working in such a dynamic capacity, but in a sphere that so few people really
Hmm.
understand
Right.
or care to understand. And I think that's one of the quintessential messages of the show is that, for the music aspect of it, we love to drive home the message that playing an instrument is not a barrier of entry for being in live music. And I think, I hope this stresses the fact that being an actor isn't a barrier for entry for being involved in television.
That's right. Yeah.
So going towards some of the end or most of your time with you until aside from Star Trek, what are some of the other highlights towards the eve of your career that you look back on and say like, oh, what you know what? One comes to mind that I would love to hear about. Something about a Motley Crue music
Hmm.
video.
Oh
Love
yeah.
to hear.
Yeah.
Love to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah. I personally saved a Motley Crue video so that it could air on MTV. MTV previewed it and found some objectionable material in the background of one of the sets. And it was a Western set with probably a general store. And in the window, they had a little sign that said, "No fags allowed." And MTV said, "No, no, no, no. We're not going to air that on our airspace." And so they were at a loss what to do because this is underneath all the production, all the special effects and dissolves and things that wouldn't be easy to fix necessarily, or how to go about it. And it was a December, and our house artist was not in, so I said, "Well, let me take a look at it." As I figure, if I rotoscope and turn the F into a B, the sign will say "No bags allowed," which a lot of stores do to reduce shoplifting. So I
So you would
painstakingly,
essentially. Oh, sorry to interrupt you. Go ahead.
no, it's okay.
To
I,
change it from
as
from
I just to the F, I just completed the loop to make it a B, and so now no bags allowed, and
no
so they could air
bags
it on MTV.
and
And
read
you
into that what you will.
right, exactly, yeah. And so you can actually go to YouTube and see it to this day. It's on there.
we're
It's
gonna
called
we're
it's
gonna put.
called
Let's start. Go ahead.
Doctor Feel. The video is Doctor Feelgood.
Oh, I know. Yeah, I love that song. Yeah, well, we're gonna
Well,
put the link to that video
mhm,
in the
yeah.
in the
Well,
description. Yeah.
watch towards the end when there's the scene of the Western town here. Look hard.
It's outstanding. I gotta ask, on the note of working on a project with Motley Crue, how much experience did you get, maybe towards the end of your career, working with musical artists as opposed to just necessarily network television production?
Oh, we had Kiss came in for when they had a production called Kiss My Ass back in the 90s.
That sounds about right. Yeah.
And Gene Simmons was in for that. He came in and we got to chat with him a little bit. And then also worked with Firesign Theater.
One of my all-time favorites. I have
Hmm.
several of their
Yep.
records.
Yeah.
I
Right.
grew like
Hmm.
oh, hand me the pliers. Or for
Hmm.
I one of
And,
my absolute favorites.
and the show was In Search of the Lost Yoke.
I'll have to check it out.
Yolk yoke.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, like, yeah, it's just such a. And just real quick, kind of to finish on that point,
Hmm.
did you ever, was there any difference in working with a musical artist versus working with a television personality or an actor? Or were you never kind of in that sphere where you were working directly with the artists
Oh,
themselves?
tangentially, like one time, Unitil at the time was the go-to place to have music video film transferred to tape. They didn't do digital video, they did film, then they transferred it. And so we had a really good system for recording the film to videotape. And one time, Madonna came in working on one of her shows, and she was not a happy camper. You didn't want to mess with her at that point. It was one of the interesting things. And on the other side, David Lee Roth was working on something. He would actually ride a bicycle to the Paramount Studios lot and come into our place to work on his stuff. He would come out to the machine room and he would talk with us. He was very friendly.
You know, it's just it'll never get old to me. People just dropping names like Madonna and David Lee Roth. I mean, it's really I mean, just wow. So you spent going on then the rest of your career at Unitel. Why why not move on to another production gig once Unitel and correct me if I'm wrong, you stayed until their
Mm-hmm.
closing in
Yeah, right.
1998. Why not move on to
Exactly.
another production house?
A couple of reasons. One, there we're getting fewer and fewer production companies or post houses that I really wanted to work at. The industry was changing so much to using personal computers and other types of operations. And so I didn't want to go into freelance because I was just
Mm,
so used to having a structured environment with the pay, work conditions, and so on. Plus, I was getting close to 50 years old. And I just didn't want to start at the bottom again. And so I said, well, why don't you go back and work in the machine room? And, well, no, I really don't want to work in the machine room after doing the things that I've done. And
mm,
so I just decided, well, I'm going to make a change. So with an old friend of mine, we started a small marketing business doing advertising and websites for radio stations. And I ended up making a lot of banner graphics for West Coast radio stations for a few years. And when that petered out, I had moved to the Palm Springs area. I met my wife. She had a small photo shop that did printing and photography and all that sort of stuff. And so she needed some help. And so I said, well, I'll be glad to come on it because I've been a photographer all my life. And so I used my photographic skills and then also my Photoshop skills. And so I've done a lot of archival retouching, repairing damaged photographs of people that have the tear across their face and
mm.
generate the fix to where you can't even see it anymore. And to me,
Wow.
the retouching is the hardest kind of artwork because you can't do what you want to do. You have to match what somebody else has done and do it seamlessly. And so
But
it's
it's
tricky.
almost like the video editing equivalent of plastic surgery. If I'm hearing it right, where you've got to like create something out of whole cloth to repair something that exists,
Hmm.
not
Right.
something that you're building onto.
Yeah. Yeah. So that the Photoshop business was great until cell phones came out, and everybody said, "Well, we don't need to have you to do our family photos. We can do it on our phone." And so that it was time to leave that business. But it did give me some skills. Um, I participated in the Chamber of Commerce where we lived, and there was this outfit called Business Networking International, and it's a marketing forum for businesses to get to know each other and help each other with referrals. And as part of that, they also taught you how to do public speaking. And so
Mm.
I'm up to that point, I've been terribly shy. And the thought of leading a group of 100 people in a presentation was like the farthest thing from my mind. Well, I got so I could do that because with the support of BNI, the people there were great. And it was like somehow I lost the fear of failure. And so I could go in and do a production. And if I messed up, so what? Just move on. It's no big deal. And so it's a confidence builder. And so I was able to be president of the Chamber of Commerce for a year. And that was a big achievement for me.
My students ask me sometimes if I after so many shows if I still get stage fright, and what I tell them is something I learned from my mentor, shout out Knut
Hmm.
Horowitz. He said to me, "You're always going to feel some sort of way before you walk out
Right.
on stage,
Hmm.
but that energy is within you, and it's your choice which way to purpose it."
Hmm.
And what I've done in my, over the course of my career is, I do still feel that feeling even after all these years, but I call it stage motivation. And I use it to pump myself up as opposed to
Hmm.
become nervous about it. And it's like you just spoke to that. Those are the things within our control that we're able to reach
Hmm.
in and change and be a part of and be make effective change in. And it's awesome to hear that post career took your technical
Hmm.
experience and practical experience and continue to repurpose that towards projects in your post career life.
Yeah, I actually used Dick Clark as a model for his stage presence and his mannerisms. He always impressed me as being relaxed and natural on stage, and it was a good thing.
I mean, it's a name and personality if there ever was one, which
Hmm.
leads me to my next question. Looking back at your illustrious 25 plus year career in, the golden age of television, what are some moments that we haven't talked about yet? Maybe one or two that stand out in your memory as moments that really either were formative
Hmm.
in your career or that you're proud
Well, I always brought a kind of performance to my work wherever it was appropriate. So I figured you can do things the easy way, you can do things a particular way, but if you can do it where it's excellent,
of?
why not? It doesn't cost any more in a sense. And one of the times where that worked out was at Unitil, and the Windham Hill music video was being produced, and they needed to finish their end credits with a roll. And at that point, I'd been working on the digital area, so I wasn't doing Chyron. And so we had a person that did that, and she was new and not experienced, and she didn't want to take any appropriate, friendly advice. And so she couldn't make the roll start right when they wanted it to at a certain point in the music. And so they actually had to call me at home at like 11 o'clock at night, and I had to drive back to Hollywood, go into the place, see what she did. She had gone by then. Format the Chyron roll because I have a way to make it start instantly. And we tried it, and they said, "Well, we wanted to start at 30 minutes, 20 seconds, and 15 frames, some particular amount." And there's a readout to do that. And so I looked at that and I missed it because it's very difficult to do that. And so what I listened to the music, and what they really wanted was the roll to start on a particular note. And so I said something to them, which still reminds me to this day. I said, "Turn up the music. The music is my time code." They played it back. I heard the music, banged it right on the spot. The clients cheered. We were done. So,
Yeah, see, I love that. You know, it's and as a comedian, I can relate to this with walk-on music, like that
mhm,
to be able to adapt to understand that the music could be a cue, just to
right.
understand that it can be a cue, let alone to utilize it as such. That is, I mean, shows the experience and the technological capability and the artistic prowess. I think all
Hmm.
wrapped into one beautiful little story there. And I would love to finish off with uh, just any career reflection, advice to people who are coming into the video industry. I know you've maintained your finger on the pulse of the industry as it's continued to evolve technologically. Just wondering if there's any words of wisdom you have to share to those folks who are thinking about pursuing a career in the now rapidly progressing technologies of video editing.
Well, being a highly competitive business, I always felt that around half of my job was doing the technical aspects of my job. The other half was keeping my job, meaning
Hmm.
not getting into politics, doing everything I was supposed to do, being on time, actually being before time. This when I'm going to have my interview with you, I was 15 minutes early, all logged in and checked up so that I would be ready when you were ready. And so having that kind of mentality, I think is very important.
And I can attest to that. We started right on time. Dave Eckenberg, thank you so much for taking your time to be a part of the show. This has been an absolute joy of a conversation, one of the most unique that we've had so far on this show. And it's tough to say that after so many illustrious guests, and I'm so glad that we can count you in that number. Dave, thank you so much for being on the show.
Well, I'm really honored to have the chance to talk with you, and I really appreciate everything you've done. Thank you.
Oh, it means the world, folks. This has been Steiner with another episode of Secondhand Talent, and we will see you next Wednesday. And that's a podcast. There we go. We're
Cool.
done. All
Great.
right.